She walked into the library and was never seen again. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, just a 17-year-old girl. Gone. For 2 decades her name faded from headlines, until one morning a librarian opened the return box and found the exact book Emily had checked out the day she vanished. Inside there was a message no one could explain. What happened to Emily Hewitt? And who returned her book? 20 years later? Before we start, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We read everyone. Now take a breath and stay close, because this story won't leave you. The wind had picked up that morning in Providence. It wasn't violent, not yet. But it was the kind of wind that carried memory, soft, hollow, and insistent. It slipped between the bricks of old buildings, whispered under doorways, and brushed through the cracks of windows that hadn't closed properly in decades. The trees along the sidewalk rustled as if unsettled, leaves dragging across the pavement like forgotten notes from the past. On the corner of Empire Street, the Providence Public Library stood exactly as it had for over a century, grand, stoic, and out of place, like an aging monarch surrounded by a kingdom that had long since stopped kneeling. Its massive stone facade, black iron lampposts, and arched windows made it beautiful from afar, but up close, the building carried its own kind of weariness. Chipped marble steps, a crack running along the corner of the south tower. And beneath one of the basement windows, a strange discoloration on the wall, faint but lingering. Inside, it was silent, not the kind of silence found in ordinary libraries, but a deeper kind, an old silence, thick and settled like dust in a forgotten attic. The flickering of a fluorescent bulb overhead added rhythm to the stillness, as did the distant hum of the HVAC system buried in the walls. Somewhere down a hallway, a cart squeaked briefly, then stopped. Then nothing. For 20 years, no one had mentioned her name inside those walls. It wasn't a rule. No one had written it down or spoken it out loud, but everyone who worked there, those who had been there long enough to remember, had agreed, in that silent way people do, to let the past remain buried. But today, something came back. It was 7:06 a.m. when Camille, a young librarian in her 3rd week on the job, unlocked the back entrance and pulled open the heavy door that led into the staff hallway. She was running late, juggling coffee, keys, and a tote bag filled with unprocessed returns. She didn't notice the small red light blinking on the wall-mounted camera, the one above the return chute. Had she looked, she might have paused, but she didn't. She moved toward the drop-off bin. It was old, mechanical, the kind that opened with a sharp metallic clang. She pulled the handle and reached in, expecting the usual donations and unmarked copies, but there was only one book, a hardcover. Wrapped carefully in plastic. She pulled it out, stared at it, frowned. It was in perfect condition. 10 Days in a Madhouse, the title read. The spine was intact. No dust, no visible aging. Just one faint crease where the front cover bent slightly at the bottom corner. Camille turned it over, scanning for a barcode. It was there, faded but legible, just beneath the label. Borrower, Emily Hewitt. Due, May 19, 2005. Camille stared at the name for several seconds. It tugged at something distant in her memory, like a dream from childhood she couldn't fully grasp. She walked the book to the main desk and logged in to the database. The screen flickered, then froze, then loaded. A yellow notice blinked across the top. Borrower account deactivated. Missing person report. See admin log. Camille's throat tightened. She glanced around the empty lobby, her fingers suddenly cold against the keyboard. Slowly, she opened the book again. Something was tucked between pages 114 and 115. A note, a single piece of aged paper folded 4 times. She unfolded it. 3 words. She knew too much. In another part of the city, a phone rang in a small 1-bedroom apartment lined with dust-covered bookshelves. The man who picked it up hadn't received a call from the library in 18 years. Elliot Monroe answered on the second ring. "Mr. Monroe," the voice said, we think you should come in. Someone returned her book." Silence. Then the faint, breathless reply. "What?" Outside, the wind grew colder. Somewhere near the library, a bird flew overhead, crying out before vanishing into the sky, leaving only a flutter of wings and the sound of leaves chasing shadows down the street. The past had returned, and it had something to say. Before the headline, before the missing posters, before the whispers that never really left Providence, she was just Emily, 17 years old, barely taller than 5'2". Brown hair she never bothered to style, quiet eyes that noticed more than she let on, and a voice that only rose above a whisper when she was reading something that mattered. She lived on the second floor of a red brick duplex on Brook Street with her older brother Aaron and their aunt Doris, a retired nurse who had taken them in after the accident that changed everything. Emily's parents had died in a car crash when she was 9, a drunk driver, rainy night. Nothing could be done. She didn't cry at the funeral. She just stood there, holding a damp tissue she never used, her eyes fixed on the casket like she was trying to understand something no one else could see. From that day on, books became her oxygen. Every birthday, she asked for a journal. She had over 20 of them by the time she turned 17. But the last one went missing with her. Emily loved the library. Not in the way most kids love a quiet place to study. She loved it the way some people love church. It was sacred to her. She said it smelled like old paper and possibility. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, she'd walk the 4 blocks from East Side High to the Providence Public Library, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder and her eyes already scanning for new arrivals through the front windows. The security guard, Mr. Langston, always nodded at her. "Back again, Miss Hewitt?" And she'd smile politely, say, "Yes, sir," and vanish down the halls. She had a favorite chair on the 3rd floor tucked behind the nonfiction stacks, facing a window that overlooked the city. That's where she read about Nellie Bly, the journalist who faked mental illness to infiltrate an asylum. It wasn't a school assignment. Emily had found her by accident, buried in the back of a biography section most people skipped. "She risked everything to tell the truth," Emily wrote in one of her journals. "That's not bravery, that's obsession." I think I understand that now. Aaron noticed the changes first. She started staying longer at the library, coming home after dark, locking her door more often, writing obsessively in a small cloth-bound notebook that she refused to let him see. "You all right?" he asked her one night, as they ate reheated pizza at the kitchen table. The air smelled like tomato sauce and tension. "Yeah," she said, barely looking up. "Just school." He didn't press. Aaron was 20 at the time, working night shifts at a repair garage and struggling with his own guilt. He'd been the one driving the night of the accident. His parents had insisted on picking him up after a late movie. He'd begged them not to. When they never made it, something broke in him. And he swore he'd protect Emily no matter what. But he didn't see the danger this time. On a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks before Emily vanished, she stayed late at the library. When she came home, her hands were shaking. Aaron noticed, but she hid them under the table. "You okay?" he asked again. "I saw something," she said softly. He paused. "Like, what?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Doesn't matter. I was probably just tired." He never found out what she meant, and she never brought it up again. The week before she disappeared, she submitted a proposal for a school project titled Women History Forgot. It focused on journalists, activists, and whistleblowers who were dismissed or discredited. Her English teacher, Mrs. Rayburn, wrote a note on the bottom, "Incredible topic, Emily, but be careful how deep you dig. Some stories stay buried for a reason." Emily wrote back in the margins, "That's why I want to tell them." Her last Friday was cold and gray. The sky looked heavy, like it might snow, but never did. She left school with her usual bag, her notebook, and a quiet goodbye to Aaron. They barely spoke that morning. He was running late. She was distracted. A neighbor, Mrs. Green, would later say she saw Emily at the crosswalk, waiting patiently, notebook clutched to her chest like a secret. She looked focused, Mrs. Green said, determined, like she knew exactly where she was going. She never came home. The police searched everywhere. Her school locker, her bedroom, the library. They pulled surveillance footage from the day. One grainy camera showed her entering the building at 3:41 p.m. She was never seen leaving. Her bag was never found. Her notebook disappeared with her. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just gone. For months the town buzzed with rumors. Some said she ran away. Others whispered about an older man she might have been meeting. A few believed she'd discovered something someone didn't want her to know. But no one could prove anything. Eventually the posters faded. The case went cold. The library replaced the carpets and installed new lights. Mr. Langston retired. The world moved on. Except Aaron didn't. He kept the room exactly as she'd left it. Same sheets, same books on the shelf, same pen on the desk, dried up and untouched. He replayed their last conversation 1,000 times in his head. I saw something. He never forgave himself for not asking what. The book sat on the library counter for 2 hours before someone realized it shouldn't be there. Camille hadn't said a word about the note tucked inside. She showed the book to Joanna Reyes, the library director, omitting the handwritten message. Something in her gut told her not to mention it, at least, not yet. Instead, she placed the note in her coat pocket and brought the book to the archive desk for catalog review. That afternoon, Joanna sent an email to Providence PD. Not a full report, just a line. Returned item linked to open missing persons case. Please advise. She never got a reply. By the next morning, rumors had already begun. Emily Hewitt's name was spoken again. Some said it was a prank. Others believed it meant something more. A few staff members, those who had worked in the library back in 2005, avoided the third floor entirely that week. But Elliot Monroe didn't avoid it. He returned. His presence after so many years felt like a ghost walking through the building. He wore a worn wool coat and moved slowly, favoring one leg. His face had aged, but his eyes remained sharp. When he stepped through the front doors, time seemed to shift. Camille was behind the desk when he arrived. She stood. "You're Mr. Monroe," she said. He nodded once. "I need to see it," he said. Camille led him to the staff room, where the book had been placed inside a sealed evidence bag. Elliot held it with gloved hands and stared at the cover for a long time. "She checked this out herself," he said. "You remember that?" "I remember the way she held it, like it mattered." Camille hesitated. Then she pulled the folded note from her pocket. "I didn't tell anyone," she whispered, "but this was inside." Elliot opened it slowly. She knew too much. His hand trembled. He folded it again and placed it back into the bag. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In the drop box. No one saw who left it." Elliot exhaled through his nose. "Of course not." That night, Camille couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at her. Around 2:30 a.m., she grabbed her phone and opened an old news article from 2005. Emily's photo was there, young, soft smile, eyes thoughtful. Camille stared at it, then flipped back to the library's return logs. There was no barcode scan, no timestamp, nothing. Technically, the book had never returned. The following day, a box of archival records from 2005 went missing from the basement. Joanna blamed disorganization. Camille insisted she had just seen them the week before. "You're imagining things," Joanna said curtly. But Camille wasn't the only one who noticed things going missing. Marissa Lane, a local journalist who had grown up in Providence, caught wind of the story. when her editor forwarded the library's vague inquiry to her inbox. Her first instinct, someone wanted this forgotten. Her second, dig. Marissa's apartment was filled with boxes from past investigations. She printed Emily's last school photo and pinned it beside a copy of the library's floor plan. That night, she visited the library posing as a patron, asking about access to microfilm records from 2005. The intern at the desk, nervous and new, said the machine was temporarily unavailable. Marissa asked why. He didn't know. Just that someone had come in the night before and removed the reel labeled May-June 2005. Marissa didn't believe in coincidence. Aaron Hewitt heard about the book 2 days later. He hadn't stepped foot in Providence in years, but when a voicemail came from a reporter asking for a comment on the returned item, something inside him cracked open. He didn't call back. Instead, he packed a bag. The next morning, Camille arrived at work to find her desk drawer open. Nothing was missing, but everything had been moved, shifted, rearranged just slightly enough to feel like a warning. In the break room, someone had placed a photocopy of the note on the table. She knew too much. Printed in large black letters, she looked around. No one said a word. That same week, 2 things happened. A former janitor from 2005, Leo Densmore, was found dead in his home, an apparent heart attack. But neighbors reported hearing loud banging the night before. A fire alarm was triggered on the 3rd floor of the library. No smoke, no fire. Just a small electrical short in the same hallway where Emily used to sit. The alarm had never malfunctioned before. Marissa found an old interview transcript buried in public records. It was from 2006, taken by a now-retired detective. The interviewee was Elliot Monroe. One quote stood out, "She was afraid of something. I could see it in her eyes the week before. But when I asked, she just said, 'Some stories don't want to be told.'" That line wasn't in the official case file. Aaron finally returned to the library. He walked in slowly, staring at the building like it had aged more than he had. Camille met him at the door. They didn't speak at first. He just nodded, and she led him to the staff room. He held the book in silence. He didn't open it. He didn't ask to. He just whispered, "She was right. She always is." Later that night, Camille's car alarm went off at 1:11 a.m. When she got outside, the car was untouched. But inside, on the driver's seat, was a single page torn from a notebook. It read, "Not everyone wants the truth found." On the 5th day after the book was returned, Marissa Lane pushed open the door of the Providence Hall of Records and asked for building blueprints from 2005. The clerk gave her a strange look. "Flooded," he said flatly. "Excuse me?" "Storage basement. Back in 2009. Most of the archived blueprints from the 2000s got waterlogged. Some are legible, some aren't." Marissa followed him through a narrow hallway, lined with buzzing fluorescent lights. They reached a locked room. Inside, boxes stacked to the ceiling, damp, cold, smelling faintly of mold and forgotten stories. She found the one labeled Prov Lib 2005. Half the contents were missing. The remaining pages were warped and stained, but one sheet caught her eye, a hand-sketched diagram of a service corridor that ran parallel to the 3rd-floor reading room. A corridor that didn't appear in modern blueprints. At the same time, Aaron was at East Side High School, meeting with Emily's old English teacher, Mrs. Rayburn, now retired but still sharp. "I've thought about that girl every year," she said, pouring him tea. "She was different, intense, like she carried too much weight for her age." Aaron showed her the note. She knew too much. Rayburn went still. "She told me something once," the teacher said quietly. "She said there was a room at the library no one talked about. Said it was locked most of the time. Said she saw a man go in and never come out." Aaron's stomach turned. "Did she say what kind of man?" "She said he wasn't supposed to be there." Back at the library, Camille was still shaken by the note left in her car. She tried to report it to Joanna, but the director brushed it off. "Someone's playing games," Joanna said. "This is a public building. Anyone could have found that book." Camille didn't believe that, and when Joanna caught her reviewing old security footage again, she was warned. "Let it go, Camille. You're not here to solve crimes." But Camille didn't let it go. Marissa and Aaron met that evening in a diner off Hope Street. Rain tapped softly against the windows as she laid out the blueprint copy and her findings. "There's something back there," she said, "and I don't think it's just dust and broken furniture." Aaron leaned forward. "My sister kept a journal. A small cloth one. She never let it out of her sight. If we find that, if it's still there—" Marissa nodded. "We go in tomorrow." That night, Camille waited until the library closed. She stayed behind, claiming she was doing inventory. When the last staff member left, she made her way to the north stairwell, the one that had been sealed off during renovations but recently reopened. She carried a flashlight and a floor plan printed from Marissa's files. The service corridor was real. Narrow, dark, filled with exposed pipes and wires. At the end, a rusted door with a faded plaque. "Staff records, restricted access." Camille reached for the handle. Locked. But the lock was old. Weak. She took a bobby pin from her hair and jiggled it until it gave way with a tired click. The room beyond was dust-covered and silent. Broken file cabinets, faded posters, a single desk lamp, and behind it a built-in bookshelf that didn't quite touch the floor. She crouched. There, behind the lowest shelf, she found a panel, loose and wood. She pried it open. Inside, a cloth-bound journal, worn but intact. A pressed flower, dried and fragile, and a folded envelope with the initials E.H. She took all three and ran. The journal was Emily's. Inside, in small, neat handwriting, were weeks of entries about her research, her discoveries, her fear. She wrote about a man named Douglas Keene, a former director who left abruptly in early 2005 after a series of complaints were quietly settled. Emily believed he was still using library access points to meet with people privately. She suspected blackmail. She claimed she had seen him enter the service corridor with Leo Densmore, the janitor who had recently died. She wrote, "He gave Leo something in a black envelope. Leo looked scared. I don't know what it means, but I'm going to ask Elliot. He was there that night. He knows something. I can feel it." That was the final entry. Aaron sat in silence after reading it. He stared at the page for a long time. "She was right," he whispered. "Elliot's hiding something." The next morning, Marissa confronted Elliot in the reading room. The old man looked tired, thinner, but his eyes were alert. "I know about the corridor," she said. "I know about Keene." He didn't flinch. "I've been waiting for this," he said. "You knew she saw something." "Afe told me," he nodded. "And I told her to stop. I told her to leave it alone. She wouldn't." "Why didn't you come forward?" "Because she asked me not to." Marissa froze. "She gave me something, the day before she disappeared." "What?" Elliot reached into his coat. He pulled out an envelope. "I kept it all these years. I didn't open it. I couldn't." Inside was a letter, written in Emily's unmistakable hand. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Please tell Aaron I'm sorry I didn't tell him everything. I wanted to finish what I started. Douglas Keene is dangerous. He's not acting alone. There's something in the archives room, something he's keeping there. I don't know what. But someone should look." Marissa and Aaron exchanged a glance. There was another room, another door, and the key was in Elliot's pocket. The archives room had always been locked. Even in 2005, only senior staff had access, and only with written permission. It wasn't where books were stored. It was where they disappeared. Forgotten donations, redacted reports, internal memos from the library board that no one was ever supposed to read. The door was heavy, metal, reinforced. The kind of door that doesn't just keep people out, it keeps things in. Elliot stood in front of it now, trembling slightly as he pulled out the old brass key from a chain around his neck. He looked at Aaron and Marissa. "She trusted me to hold this," he said. "Now, it's yours." The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Inside, dust hung in the air like suspended time. Stacks of unlabeled boxes, old microfilm reels, a file cabinet with a broken drawer. On the far wall, a bulletin board covered in faded photos, articles, and a map of Providence with red threads connecting certain locations. At first glance, it looked like a conspiracy theorist's lair. But as Marissa stepped closer, she recognized the names: Keene, Densmore, Joanna Reyes. And in the center of the board, a photo of Emily printed from her school ID pinned with a rusted tack. Aaron's voice was raw. "What the hell is this?" Marissa pulled open one of the boxes. Inside, transcripts of disciplinary hearings from 2003-2005. Most involved Douglas Keene. But the allegations weren't about blackmail. They were about youth programming abuse, private meetings, manipulation, silence from the board. Everything had been swept under the rug. Emily had found these records, and she had written it all down. There, on a lower shelf, they found a shoebox labeled simply E.H. Inside was the missing notebook. Emily's final entries were dated May 17, 2005. He told Leo to get rid of them. "I heard them through the vent. He said they were a liability, said if the files got out, everything would collapse. Leo didn't want to do it, but I think he was scared. I made a copy. I hid it, just in case." They spent hours tearing the room apart. Eventually, Marissa found a false floor panel beneath a table. Beneath it, a waterproof envelope with a flash drive taped inside. It contained scans of the files Emily copied before she vanished. They detailed years of hidden abuse claims tied to Keene, many involving vulnerable teens brought in through a special mentorship program he created in partnership with local shelters. Names were redacted, but not all. And at the bottom of one report, a signature stood out: Joanna Reyes. "She knew," Marissa whispered. Elliot collapsed into a chair. "We all knew. But we didn't think she'd push that far." Aaron stepped back, rage filling his chest. "You let her walk into this alone." "I tried to stop her." "No, you tried to silence her." The tension cracked. Aaron stormed out. Marissa stayed behind. On the wall, among the documents, she noticed a pattern, a sequence of dates and meeting times, handwritten in the corner of several reports. She traced them to a recurring time slot: Tuesday evenings, room 213, registered as a staff training session. But there were no records of that room being used by any official program. She checked the logs. May 17, 2005. Room 213 was reserved under DK. That was the day before Emily vanished. She went to Camille. "Was there ever a room 213? Camille frowned. "Not that I've seen. There's a staff lounge on the second floor, but it used to be something else." They checked. Behind an old vending machine, long since unplugged, they found the frame of a door. It had been sealed with drywall, but poorly. Camille ran her hand along the edges and felt the soft give of rotted wood behind the paneling. They broke through. Inside, an old office, small, windowless, stale, and in the far corner a rust-colored stain on the floor. The wallpaper had peeled. The ceiling was sagging, but in the middle of the room, half covered in dust, sat an object that didn't belong. A necklace. Emily's necklace. Aaron returned that night. They didn't speak at first. Camille handed him the necklace wordlessly. He stared at it like it was made of bone. "That was hers," he whispered. "She never took it off, not even in the shower." He sat down, numb. They told him what they'd found: the office, the documents, the hidden meetings. The truth was unavoidable now. Emily had uncovered a hidden operation. Keene was the centerpiece, Joanna Reyes had signed off, and the one person who tried to expose it had disappeared. Marissa prepared a report for the police. But when she called the precinct, something was wrong. The detective assigned to the case, a man named Ramirez, was no longer with the department, transferred, no forwarding contact. The new officer she spoke to promised to look into it, but didn't ask for the flash drive. Didn't take her name, didn't care. That night, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen. But on her mirror, written in red marker, were the words, "Walk away." Marissa didn't sleep. She packed a bag, hid backups of the files in 3 locations, made copies for Aaron and Camille. And then she published everything, not through a newspaper, through her own voice. She uploaded the first episode of her podcast, The Truth Emily Knew. Within hours, it went viral. Thousands of downloads, hundreds of comments, and one message sent anonymously that simply read, "She wasn't the only one." It didn't take long. By the 3rd day after the podcast went live, the Providence Public Library was at the center of a local firestorm. Talk shows, online forums, anonymous sources, former staff members who suddenly remembered things they had buried years ago. Marissa Lane had unleashed something, and now it was everywhere. Joanna Reyes was suspended within 48 hours of the first broadcast. Officially, it was pending investigation. Unofficially, she had been forced into silence by library board attorneys. She refused to speak to the press. She refused to speak to the police. She refused to speak to Aaron, who stood outside her gated townhouse for 3 consecutive mornings. On the 3rd day, she finally cracked open her door. "You signed the reports," Aaron said, voice shaking. "I didn't know what they were," Joanna snapped. "That's a lie." She looked away. "I was 25, new to the system. I was told not to ask questions. I didn't want to lose everything before I'd even started." "She lost everything." Joanna looked at him, and for the first time, her voice broke. "I know." She closed the door. Camille submitted her resignation. It wasn't an act of protest. It was preservation. She had spent every day since the discovery, checking over her shoulder. Her apartment had been entered twice, no forced entry. Her laptop wiped clean, her phone tapped. She handed in her badge and walked away. But not before leaving something on Aaron's porch, a printed copy of Emily's last full journal with her own handwritten annotations cross-referenced with new documents that had surfaced since the podcast. At the bottom, Camille had written, "She was the bravest person I never met." Elliot Monroe died 6 days later. Heart failure. Aaron sat in the back row of the memorial. Only a dozen people attended. The man had no children, no spouse. No siblings left, but in his coat pocket they found an envelope addressed to Emily's brother. Inside, "I failed her. I saw the smoke and I looked away. I let her walk into it alone. If I believed in forgiveness, I'd ask for it, but I don't. I just hope you do better than I did." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Aaron didn't go home. He drove, for hours, across the state line, into New Hampshire, through the night, and in a forest park near Keene, he finally pulled over. There, by the water's edge, he opened the old shoebox that had once held her notebooks. He took out the necklace. The clasp was broken, the chain tangled. But the charm was still intact, a small silver compass. He remembered giving it to her on her 12th birthday. "As though you never get lost again," he'd told her. Now he held it and cried for the first time in 20 years. Not the tears of rage or guilt, but the kind of tears that come when the truth finally settles into the bones. The police never found a body, but they reopened the case, new testimonies, recovered documents, and 2 former library board members who came forward anonymously to confirm the existence of the mentorship program and its true purpose. Douglas Keene was officially listed as missing. He had left the country years earlier, Interpol issued a quiet notice, but everyone knew he'd never be seen again. The truth had surfaced, but justice was still a stranger. Marissa continued the podcast. The truth Emily knew became a national sensation. Other families reached out. Other cold cases found light. But none hit as hard as the original. She closed season 1 with a monologue. She was 17. She asked too many questions. She walked into a building one day and never came out. But she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a case number. She was a girl, a daughter, a sister, a voice. And someone tried to silence that voice, but they didn't win, because now you're listening. And because of that, she's still speaking. In the quiet that followed, Aaron did something no one expected. He reopened Emily's room, removed nothing, but repainted the walls, opened the windows, let the dust settle in the light. Then, carefully, he placed the necklace on her desk, and beside it, one of her old journals, not the one with the evidence, not the one filled with fear, but the first one, the one where she'd written at 9 years old. "Someday I'm going to change something." And she did. A year passed. The library changed. Gone were the outdated security systems and sealed-off hallways. Room 213 had been torn down entirely during renovations. The archives room was digitized. A small bronze plaque was placed near the entrance of the building, right under the second column from the left. It read, "In memory of Emily Hewitt, a reader, a writer, a seeker of truth." Let no story be buried. People passed by it every day. Some paused, some didn't. But it stood there quietly, like she once had. A small figure in a giant space, watching, listening, remembering. Aaron never left Providence again. He got a job at a youth outreach center, mentorship programs, tutoring. He never spoke about Emily in public interviews, but in private sessions, when teens asked why he did what he did, he'd answer, "Because one voice can change everything." Marissa won several journalism awards that year, but none of them mattered as much as the email she received on a Tuesday afternoon from a girl in Indiana. It read, "My sister disappeared 3 years ago. I thought no one cared. But after your podcast, I'm not giving up." She printed that message, taped it beside her desk. Then she opened Season 2. Camille moved to Vermont, bought a small bookstore, quiet, peaceful. Sometimes she'd see young girls browsing biographies, and she'd feel something twist in her chest. One day, a 12-year-old asked her, "Who's that woman?" pointing to a framed black-and-white photo on the counter. Camille smiled. "That's Emily. She used to read here, too." The girl stared at the photo. "She looks brave." "She was," Camille said. "She still is." Every year on May 18th, a letter arrives in the mail. No return address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper. This year's said, "Some stories don't want to be told, but some refuse to stay silent." Aaron reads it every time, folds it carefully, and keeps it in the same box where he once stored her necklace. The last time anyone truly saw Emily was on a grainy security camera in 2005, but the last time she was heard was now, through every voice she inspired, through every story uncovered because of her, through every truth that refused to stay hidden. She was never just a girl who disappeared. She was the beginning of a ripple, and even in silence, she had something to say. She knew too much, they wrote. But they didn't know. She left enough for the rest of us to find her again.